seventh circle of hell is reserved for preachers who assign text that have a list of ites and other ites listed all through them. And when you get great. Thank you. When you witness trauma, suffering, and loss of life and property, or whether you experience it for yourself, one of the most frequently asked questions, at least one that comes to the surface in the midst of all of the devastation and the trails and the travesties, is this question: where is God in all of this? Where is God? It's a question that even people of faith find difficult to answer, simply because we know that we serve a God whose nature is not to intentionally inflict pain and suffering and grief on His people. And when a disbelieving world turns to us to ask, where is God in this? Sometimes we're left speechless. Not too many years ago, I asked the same question. As I was experiencing my share of trials, I asked, where are you, God? Why am I not hearing from you? So today I want to share with you what I have learned about where God is when the storms of life are raging. And by the way, this sermon took me years to write because I had to live it before I could understand it. But aren't you glad it's not going to take me years to preach it? Let us pray. Almighty God, when peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well. It is well with my soul. Amen. So many times in my seminary life and in my early ministry, I came across some seemingly insurmountable odds. When circumstances and difficulties would invade my life, I found myself, even in the midst of a seminary setting, even in the midst of some of the most enthusiastic response to being called by God to be in God's service, even then I would catch myself quietly questioning God, wondering if God understood at all exactly any of the stuff that I was going through. And then I would go from being quietly upset or quietly questioning to actually being upset, and then from getting upset to actually getting angry with God, and we've done that. I'm not ashamed to admit that I would get angry with God. Why? Why would I get angry with God? And I understand there's a difference in getting angry with God and blaming God. God's got broad shoulders. God can take my anger. Fortunately, I never fell into the trap of blaming God for my travesties and my travails and my tribulations. But I did get angry. And you know that feeling. And the reason was because I felt that God was forever putting me in long fights with short sticks. How many of you know what that means? Okay, if you're not real sure, I'll tell you like my grandfather told me, because he used to use that expression all the time. He'd complain about somebody being in a long fight with a short stick, and finally when I got old enough to ask him what that meant, he said, well, it just simply means that what you've got is just woefully inadequate to the task. It's insufficient for the struggle that you're going through. It's being in a long fight, but having a stick that just won't reach the enemy. It represents less than what is needed. And I felt I was always fighting against the odds. Jacob, you're going to know that feeling if you don't know it already. What little I had was always overwhelmed by the demands that were placed on me and the demands I placed on myself. There were problems, yes, that I couldn't solve. There were hurdles I couldn't get over. There were walls I couldn't go around, and my life seemed to be forever a long fight, and it never seems like I had what I needed. I thought to win the victory, I needed a longer stick than the one that was put in my hand. Then one day in January of 2004, the wheels came off my ministry. I hit the wall. And I got a call from the district superintendent, which in Methodist parlance is just my supervisor. Was the person over me in that particular part of our conference. And what transpired as a result of that phone call is a story that I should share with you, and I promise I will, but not when we have time constraints like we do in the midst of a regular sermon. But trust me when I say that everything fell apart professionally, personally, financially, relationally, with family, with friends. And more than once, amid the turmoil, I would cry out, God, where are you? Why am I not hearing anything from you? I am talking to you all the time. And you're just being silent. While I was going through the process of being on temporary leave of absence from the church I was serving, I remembered that I had registered to go and hear a visiting pastor speak on our district, and I remember very well it was a Tuesday. And I reluctantly went, and when the pastor got up to preach, he opened his Bible to the book of Exodus, and he started telling about the story of Moses. We know that story well. Emily just shared part of it with us. And out of curiosity, Moses went to see the burning bush and to try to figure out why it wasn't being consumed by the fire. And it was there that God said to him, take your shoes off, Moses, for you're on holy ground. I have seen and heard the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries, and I want you, Moses, to go and bring them out of Egypt. And of course we know that Moses objected strenuously. Who am I that I should go? I'm a stutterer, surely not me. And besides, I don't even know who you are. What is your name? And the voice said, I am who I am. And I can just see Moses saying, really? Seriously? That's all you're going to give me? I am? And even if I did go, what weapons, what army would go with me? Pharaoh has thousands of chariots and tens and thousands of soldiers. Who would march with me to go and free them? And the answer came back, what's in your hand? And Moses said, stick. The voice said, take that. Now wait a minute. Let me read the minutes of this meeting back to you and see if I've got this right. You want me, Moses, a stutterer, to go to Pharaoh and tell him to let the children of Israel go, and when he asked me who sent me to make such an audacious request, I'm going to say, I am sent me. And then you want me to take this stick as a weapon? Did I get that down right? And that's when it hit me. Moses was making the same mistake that I was making, and that so many of us make. You see, when we look at something, especially when God calls us to do something, in our eyes, God never gives us enough. But in the eyes of God, it's always more than enough. And so after that service, I went home and I took my Bible out and I started thumbing through it and realized that on almost every page, when God called people to serve Him, they always thought that they didn't have enough to get the job done. Gideon in Judges 6, when God called, he protested, who am I? I'm the least in my father's house. We're the least in my tribe. Who am I to defeat the Midianites? Jeremiah, God said, I knew you when you were in your mother's womb. Don't tell me you're too young to go. Nehemiah had 52 days to do the impossible task of building the wall back around the city of Jerusalem. David shunned Saul's armor and went out to fight the giant Goliath with just 5 smooth stones. And it goes on and on and on. And when we look at the situation, as I was looking at mine, we and I have concluded that God has somehow shortchanged us for the battle, for the task. That God had put us in a terribly hard, long fight, but has given us nothing but a short stick to use. As pastor of several churches, it didn't take me long to discover that every church has its share of difficulties and problems. And so as I met with members and committees, I found out it was easy to conjure up some convenient short sticks as to why they thought the church could not move forward or do something that they needed to do or were asked to do. And most often it came down to the same 3 or 4 different reasons. Most all of them were the same when it was a struggling church. And we don't have enough members to do that. We don't have enough money to do that. We've never done it that way before. We've done it that way before, but it didn't work. We've never done it that way. And at some point, someone would say, can we just put this off for another year? Because you see, it seems at times that we are all looking for the path of least resistance. The smooth and the wide and the easy path, as Jesus called it. We want life to go just as we have planned it. Amen? And if we had our way, there would be no struggles. There would be no insurmountable obstacles. There would be no sacrifice in achieving everything that we wanted. But life doesn't work that way, and we know that. And it was at that point that I really began to understand, my friends, something I need to share with you. And if you don't remember anything else I say this morning, please remember this. God doesn't make long sticks. You'll get that on the way home. God doesn't make long sticks. As a matter of fact, God specializes in short sticks. Because God knows and God hopes that when your short stick turns out to be inadequate and insufficient, hopefully you will turn to Him for the victory. That's the lesson Paul had that he shared in 2 Corinthians. You know the story. You know the passage. It's well known that Paul had some kind of infirmity. We don't know what it was. It was a problem that was acute and troubling. Some said it was epilepsy. Some said it was malaria. Some said it was an eyesight problem. We don't know exactly what it was. But what we know is that Paul referred to it as a thorn in the flesh and called it a messenger from Satan to torment me. Have you ever felt tormented? Scripture says he pleaded with the Lord to remove it, only to hear Him say, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Now I tell you, friends, I thought for a long time I knew what that meant. But it wasn't until this particular crisis in my life that I realized my weakness and my deficiencies were there for a reason. And the reason is when I find myself on the losing end, when I find myself in over my head with problems I can't see a way out of, it is precisely at that point in my weakness that God's power is made perfect. And I always wondered why Paul could say, I will boast all the more gladly because of my weaknesses, so that Christ's power can rest on me. Really, Paul? Really? You can brag about your problems? Sure. But for one reason. So that God gets the glory. And so that Christ's power can rest on me. Friends, it's like this. If God simply gave us victory after victory without relying on Him, we would soon make ourselves little gods. Our egos would be uncontrollable. We would quickly say, look what I've done. Look what I've accomplished. Look what I've achieved. And then we wouldn't need and we would virtually eliminate God from our lives altogether if all we had were just long sticks of victory. But you see, when our short sticks turn out to be less than what is needed, when we know that by ourselves we can never win the battle, it is in our weakness that God steps in and makes up the difference and closes the distance. So when we ask the question, where is God in all of this? You need to know this. God is where God has always been. Right there at work, ready and willing to snatch victory out of the jaws of defeat, using overworn cliche. Joy out of sorrow, comfort out of weariness. You see, God hasn't gone anywhere. He's been right there all the time, and He's just been waiting for us to reach that weak, vulnerable moment where God does His best work. Let me close with this. Some of you may have heard of Watchman Nee. May have read his books. He was a great Chinese evangelist. He was a Christian and an internationally known pastor. And on one occasion, he and the men who were traveling with him on this particular evangelistic crusade or missionary journey were bathing in a river, and one man, who was a good swimmer, went out a little bit too far, got in way over his head, and suddenly was struck by a terrible cramp and began to cry out. And the other men could see him thrashing about in the water as he was calling for someone to help him, to save him. Watchman Nee turned to the best swimmer in his group, who was an excellent swimmer, and said, "Go out there and get him now." And the man just stood there. And the man in the water continued to scream out and thrash about, and it was obvious that he was getting in more and more trouble. And Watchman turned to the swimmer and said, "Get him, you got to go get him, save him." But the man just stood still. The other men were shouting and screaming at him, and the man just stood stationary next to Watchman Nee and watched as the other man's strokes got weaker and more feeble, his voice getting to where you could barely even hear it. Watched as the man began to sink under the water, and at that moment, instantly, the swimmer dived into the water and with a few quick strokes was right there. He put his arm around the flailing swimmer and brought him safely to shore. After the man who was drowning was revived, Watchman Nee went to the rescuer, angry now, and said, "Why did you wait so long? While you were standing there trying to decide whether or not to jump in the water and go out and help him, he could have drowned." And the experienced swimmer shook his head, smiled, and said, "No, Watchman, that's not what was going on at all." See, I knew that as long as he was struggling so strongly and so desperately, that if I were to reach him, I knew he would throw his arms around me and cling to me so tightly that both of us would drown. And then he said this: "The only way to save a drowning man is to wait until he quits trying to save himself." You've got to wait until his strength is gone, until all of his resources are exhausted. The only way to save a drowning man is to wait until he quits trying to save himself. Don and I were talking about this in the parking lot of Walmart today. Sometimes we struggle in our own pride and determination to solve our problems. But that moment when we realize that short stick is not doing all it needs to do, God is waiting on us to call on Him. And we don't know how God is going to pull power out of our weakness. But I do know this: God is waiting for us to surrender, to be weak, to use all of our resources, to be exhausted, so that His power may rest upon us. And Paul said, "Thus I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. For Christ's sake I delight in my weaknesses and insults and hardships, in persecutions and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.